All right, so we are going to be continuing our work with finding the main idea and key details. And the reason being able to identify the main idea is so important is because main ideas show comprehension. If you can say the main idea of this story or the main idea of this article is whatever, it shows that you actually understood what you read. If you can't say what the main idea is, or you say the wrong main idea, there's a likely chance that you didn't understand an important part of what you read. In fact, the most important part. So we go to our second article, Identifying Constellations by Alan James. And you'll notice that they have the paragraphs numbered to the side. That's just an important skill to recognize. If you were in my class physically and I had an article for us to read or a story, I would probably hand you an actual physical copy. And my students know the first thing that you do when you get that physical copy is number your paragraphs, because whatever work you're going to do with it, it's just good to be aware of this idea was in paragraph 1, this idea was in paragraph 2, and just to be aware of that. And it also helps you if maybe you're having a difficult day, maybe you're tired, maybe the text doesn't interest you that much, maybe you're bored, maybe it's a combination of all of that. And just being able to break down a text by physically writing on it, by circling the title, doing a lot of these common things that we do when we annotate is just, it's a very helpful skill. So just keep that in mind. All right, so we're going to start reading. And real quick, I talked about circling the title. Notice the title of articles. A lot of people, I don't know why this is, but I've noticed with fifth graders when they come in, sometimes when we're going over a text, they just skip the title and start reading. But the title is important. It lets you know what the set of paragraphs is going to be about. If it's an article, if it's a short story, the title is important. So identifying constellations, that's our title. Let's see if I can do something here. I don't know why. We're going to try this. So it's like you're in my class. Identifying constellations. It's just important to be aware of the title. Okay, that's all we need for now. All right. For thousands of years, people have come up with ways of identifying and keeping track of the stars in the night sky. One way that ancient cultures made sense of the stars was by grouping them into recognizable shapes. Sometimes these shapes were based on elements of everyday life, animals such as birds or bears, people such as hunters, and so on. Other times the shapes took the form of mythic heroes and monsters. These shapes, called constellations, helped ancient people make sense of the sky. They also gave rise to some amazing stories. One constellation that most people can identify is the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper is a constellation of 7 stars that looks like a long-handled cup or dipper for water. 3 stars form the handle and connect to the 4 stars that form the cup. The Big Dipper is part of the larger constellation called Ursa Major, or the Great Bear. The Big Dipper also points to Polaris, the North Star. Another easy constellation to spot is Orion, the Hunter. To see Orion, look for 3 stars that are close together in a slightly diagonal line. That's Orion's belt. Other stars above and below the belt form Orion's upper and lower body. All right, look here. They have a little tip for you, and iReady's going to do that. Sometimes they'll have a helpful hint when you're writing. They'll say, hey, consider doing this to improve your writing. Or they may have a little helpful hint for you to figure out how to find the meaning of a word you don't know. So always be aware of these little boxes. So it says close reader habits. When you reread the science text, underline the sentence that states the main idea of paragraph 1 only, then circle key details that support that main idea. Okay, so I like that they just assume that you're going to have to reread it, because that's what we do in 5th grade. And you're going to get sick of me saying that, but that's what we do. We go back to the text. The idea is that whatever you're going to do, you need to go back to the text. They did not give you a text that they assume that as 10 and 11-year-olds, you're just going to read through one time and know everything. You're going to have to go back to it. And they called it a close reading habit. A close reading is that thing that we talked about where I look at the paragraphs. If I don't have the paragraphs numbered, I number them myself. I circle the title. We write on the page. It's a little more difficult with virtual, but that's one thing you have access to, is that you can actually do this with a PDF using the Cami like we have in the side. And so you can annotate. These are the things that will help you when you're reading. So we're going to reread the science text. We want to underline the sentence that states the main idea of paragraph 1 only. So we're only going back and looking at paragraph 1. I'm going to use that when I need it. Okay, so for thousands of years, people have come up with ways of identifying and keeping track of the stars in the night sky. One way that ancient cultures made sense of the stars was by grouping them into recognizable shapes. Sometimes those shapes were based on elements of everyday life, animals such as birds or bears, people such as hunters, and so on. Other times, the shapes took the forms of mythic heroes and monsters. These shapes, called constellations, helped ancient people make sense of the sky. They also gave rise to some amazing stories.
Will you just continue with the event? It's not a hurry or an emergency.
Sure. Okay, so we're going to have interruptions like that sometimes. Just go with it. What I want you to do is I want you to go back and see if you can identify the main idea on your own. And so what I want you to do, I'm going to go back to the screen. I want you to pause the video and see if you can do this on your own. And then we're going to go to our activity. Okay, so hopefully you actually tried to figure it out on your own. Now we're going to go down and we're going to look at the form they've given us. So the next page, it says, what is the main idea of paragraph 1? What key details support the main idea? And then they have this little guy here. And remember, I said always notice the hints. It says the main idea of a paragraph isn't always the first sentence. Sometimes the main idea appears later in the paragraph. Okay, we talked about that last time, but that's one thing to remember, is that the main idea is not often going to be the opening sentence anymore. I know it was in second, third, and fourth grade, but in fifth grade it usually isn't, and here on it's probably not. And you'll notice that when we start writing essays together, because again, you're going to write things like a lead, you're going to introduce the text, and then you're going to put the main idea of what your essay is about towards the end of the first paragraph. Hint, hint. Okay, so let's go back. And one thing to notice is, do you see a word that occurs several times? Because if you do, that means it's a recurring idea. So do you notice any words that occur several times in the text, in this paragraph? So I see, let's see. I see the word shapes. I see it again. I see it again. And I see it again. So I see the word shapes 4 times. That lets me know that's an important idea. Okay, now the main idea is not shapes, but I see shapes over and over and over again. Okay, so I go back to the text and look at my title. My title is Identifying Constellations. I see my title in the text. Now, this is like a 50-50 thing. Sometimes it's really important, sometimes it's not, but 50 is pretty good. If you see your title in the text you're reading, or if you see an explanation of your title in the text you're reading, that's probably a really important thing. And so I go back. These shapes, called constellations, helped ancient people make sense of the sky. And then I noticed that all this talk of shapes are the different types of shapes people saw in the stars, but that these shapes called constellations, helped ancient people make sense of the sky. This is my main idea. This right here. Now, do you notice? Let's see. We have one sentence, two sentences, three sentences, four sentences, five sentences, six. So we have six sentences in paragraph one. The fifth sentence has the main idea of our paragraph. That's a new concept for a lot of fifth graders. They're used to the first sentence, and even if they're not, even if they say, okay, well, maybe it's not the first sentence, they're used to the second sentence being the main idea. But it was the next to last sentence in that paragraph. That was our main idea. So we have to make sure that we are rereading the text, that we're going back to the text, and we are looking and we're seeing, what do we notice? And we notice the shapes were a reoccurring idea, and that here, these shapes called constellations helped ancient people make sense of the sky. You see constellations, it's in our title, and this was one of those cases where it's like, okay, this is the main idea. When students get this wrong, they usually choose this sentence here. One way that ancient cultures made sense of the stars was by grouping them into recognizable shapes. And a lot of times when students choose the wrong main idea, it's because they've chosen this sentence here. And that's one of those things. I could see why you would choose that sentence. People aren't thinking that the next to last sentence in a paragraph would be the main idea, but in this case it was. And so what I would say is, if you look and you see that a word from the title, an important word from the title, is here, and that these shapes that they've been talking about, they tell us what they're called and what they do, and that's what makes this the better choice. In fifth grade, when you take a test, and especially on the LEAP, and that's why I like iReady, because iReady does this, there's almost always going to be, when you have multiple choice, you're going to have a good answer and you're going to have a better answer. That's where a lot of students get thrown off, because you can easily tell that if an option is not the answer, you're like, no, that's stupid, it doesn't make sense. But when you're given two choices and one of them is kind of good and then one of them is better, having to figure out which is the better choice is where a lot of fifth graders struggle. And so between these options, one way the ancient cultures made sense of the stars was by grouping them into recognizable shapes. It's a good option, but this is the best. And that's why this is the answer. So we go down to our main idea. I'm going to do 16. The shapes called constellations is how ancient people made sense of the stars in the sky. Okay, so now they want 3 key details. Well, you remember when we found the word shapes over and over and over again? Now we're going to go back and look at those, and we're going to see that our key details are found in those sentences. So I go up. Here we go. Okay, that's that sentence that a lot of people choose as the main idea and they get it wrong. It's good, but it's not the best. Okay, one way that ancient cultures made sense of the stars was by grouping them into recognizable shapes. Here we see that they helped make people make sense of the sky. They're called constellations. That was our better answer. Look in between. Sometimes these shapes were based on elements of everyday life, animals or birds, sometimes people, and then sometimes they were mythic heroes. That's going to be our 3 key details. So let's see, here we go. The shapes might be of everyday things such as animals. Bears, for example. Okay, and let's go back up. All right. Other times as people, other times mythic animals. Okay. The shapes might be of people, such as hunters. And that's going to be in another paragraph about Orion. And then other times the shapes might, whoa, don't want that. Might be of mythic heroes and monsters. Okay, so you see how each of these three built up to this main idea. Now, like I said, we're usually used to having the main idea listed and then details that back it up, and we'll do that in our writing. But in this paragraph, it actually had the key details that built up to the main idea. Okay, so we have our organizer complete. And then it says, what is the main idea of paragraph 1? How do the key details support that main idea? Use the space provided on page 16 to write your answer. What I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you, you have a Google Doc, and I want you to write using complete sentences and not copying the sentences directly from the text. I want you to write a paragraph and submit that to me. So just use the chart that we did. So your first sentence could be this, and then you're going to make, I want you to use 3 sentences. Each of these make a sentence, and you can expand that sentence. And then I want you to put a concluding sentence, and it's not, so I'm done, or so this is the end. I want you to write a concluding sentence that